The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Fired up and ready to begin today's conversation. Today we are joined by Dr. Lisa Firestone of Glendon Organization, and Lisa is presently even at a seminar as she's joining us, so this is definitely live radio. So hello, Dr. Lisa Firestone. How are you doing today? Did I lose you? There you are.
I'm doing well.
Can you hear me? We lost her.
Okay.
Are you there? Lisa, it might work better for you to call in the number instead of using Skype. Because we are, like I said, this is live radio, and she's at a seminar, and I love technology. I love the ability to have conversations with people all around the world, and also to be able to connect and share so much information with so many people. On the other hand, technology has its ups and its downs. So Dr. Lisa Firestone has a PhD and runs an organization called Glendon Organization, and is definitely involved with changing the way people live their lives, supporting people in moving from being emotionally reactive to responding in a wise way. She has specialties in such things as dealing with our inner critical voice, suicide prevention, the sex and love and intimate relationships, creating a life of meaning and compassion. She's got many different books, and she trains many different seminars on the subject. One of the main things that drew me towards Dr. Lisa Firestone is the fact that she is dealing with our inner critical voice. And that's the shadow side. We talk a lot about that in core alignment.
Hi, this is Lisa Firestone. Hello?
Hello, Lisa.
Hi.
We can hear you. We can hear you better now.
Okay, great. This is much better.
So I was doing my best at telling the audience about you. It would probably be easier for you to share with our audience who you are. So where are you today? You're at a seminar today.
I am at San Francisco at an existential humanistic conference for a graduate program up here.
Wonderful. Are you teaching on the inner critical voice or on one of your other subjects?
No, we're going to be talking about the critical inner voice and how it keeps you from being an adult in your life. Actually, that's what we're teaching about.
How it does what for you?
How it keeps you in either a childish mode or a parental mode, but not being your real adult self.
Okay. And we talk a lot about that in emotional wisdom training and core alignment coaching, that whole parent-child role and the ability to stand and be an adult in our lives and what a difference that truly makes.
You're right. It totally makes a difference because you're very powerful in your life when you're in adult mode. And when you're listening to your critical inner voice, you're either undermining yourself and acting more helpless or childish than you are, or you're being really parental and critical, and that's not helpful either.
So you have a place in Santa Barbara as well. The Glendon organization, is that in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, the Glendon Association is in Santa Barbara, and we have a website that has good information for people in the mental health field on the Glendon website, and then we have a sister website, Psych Alive, which has good psychological information for the general public on being alive to yourself, alive to relationships, and alive to parenting. And we do webinars and things that are available to people all over the world from there that are free and available to the public.
Yeah, I have participated in quite a number of your webinars, and I am grateful for the information that you are so willing to share. So one of the reasons that I asked you to be on my radio show is because you are dealing with the inner critical voice and also with suicide prevention. What can people do to deal more with their inner critical voice?
I think the first important thing is to really recognize it, to recognize how you're talking to yourself, because often these are thoughts that just kind of rattle around in the back of our head that we aren't fully aware of and we're just kind of believing them. So it's really important to identify them and to identify them as this internal enemy, if you will, that is trying to sabotage you in all the things you do in life, both encouraging you to engage in behavior that's going to actually be self-destructive and discouraging you from engaging in behavior that's going to be in your own self-interest. So the first step is recognizing it. I think the second step is really starting to separate from it and realize that, again, it's really not you. This is something you incorporated early in your life, and that, is now kind of running the show of your life. And that really breaking with that is the first step, is identifying with it, and then really taking actions to go against these critical inner thoughts, which is going to make you pretty anxious at first. But if you can stick with the behavior, you can really start to open up your life and have a wider range of options and be acting in your own self-interest much more.
With emotional wisdom training and core alignment coaching, that's basically what we're doing with most of our conversations, is going inside and gathering the information from our feelings, thoughts, and beliefs, the events, incidents, and accidents that have created those, as you're calling them, those inner critical voices, and those stories that we tell over and over again. We don't even know they're playing.
Right.
So what are some of the ways that you use to support people in recognizing these voices?
Well, it's important to look at, for instance, when your life goes from looking like your glass is half full to half empty, when you sort of make those kinds of shifts, it's interesting to sort of pay attention to what you're telling yourself at those moments, because, often not very much has changed in our life, but our whole feeling about it has changed, because we are now more than 51% not on our own side or into this critical inner voice. Also to look at when you really overreact to criticisms or input from other people, we have very dramatic emotional reactions. It's probably because it fits with some way that your critical inner voice tells you that you are. That doesn't mean it's true. So if, stupid is your key word and somebody calls you stupid and you have this giant overreaction, it's probably because that's something you tell yourself. And then also looking when you sort of think everybody in a certain situation thinks of you a certain way, all the people at work think you're stupid, or, all the people that in the bar think you're ugly, or, all the people in your family think this, you're probably projecting, and that's probably a function of your critical inner voice. So that's another way to recognize it. If you think, if you generalize that, a large group of people feel this way about you, it's probably because that's a negative thought you have about yourself. So you can start to recognize in those situations, what are you telling yourself that's then the filter through which you're seeing the world, which may not be particularly accurate at all.
Yeah, most of the time it's not accurate. It's like,
right.
Here we go again. This is what I tell people. When you hear yourself go, here we go again, you're
right.
kind of
That's the same old story.
The same old story, right. You notice that you're exaggerating or overgeneralizing a lot of that whole all talk. So what is something that you encourage people to do once they do recognize these voices?
Well, one of the things we do is we have people journal. That's one of the things our book, Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice, has a lot of good exercises you can do to start to externalize this process. So we have people journal about it, but in a particular way where they write it down in the second person, as though it was another person talking to them. So instead of I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I'm so stupid, it's you're so fat, you're so ugly, you're so stupid. And to just let themselves get on a roll with it and take, 5-10 minutes at the end of your day and just write down all these negative thoughts you've had during the day, but in that second person format. And just kind of let it go, and then come back to it later, and on the other side of the page, try to write a more realistic or compassionate point of view towards yourself. Because even if the critical inner voice is picking on something that's real, some area where you're struggling, to have a hostile or demeaning attitude toward yourself about it is never appropriate. The only appropriate attitude to have toward yourself is a curious, open, accepting, and loving attitude, COLE attitude, if you will, an acronym from Dan Siegel from Interpersonal Neurobiology, which is really helpful because if you're not in that point of view toward yourself, you're turned against yourself. And the idea is on the other side of the page to try to write a more realistic, compassionate view about yourself. And that really helps to start to separate it and also to start to get in touch with what's more realistic or true about you.
So one of the things that I encourage people to do is to take that third person point of view. So we've got the first point of view, I am so stupid. Then you got the second point of view, you are so stupid. And then that third person point of view where you're looking going, is that person really stupid? Am I? Is she? That whole third person objective that really begins to move us into being more resourceful with our inner critical voice. Because one of the things you said was, even if you might be dealing with a point of reality, so with our inner critical voice, what do we do when there is some concept of real in that voice?
Right. So let's say you're struggling with your weight and you would really feel better at a lower weight, or you're struggling with exercising as much as you think you should and you're not doing it, or whatever it is. So the critical inner voice has a point, and they may be calling you a lazy slob or, a fat slob. It's never appropriate to talk to yourself that way. That's not the way you would talk to a friend or somebody you cared about. So the issue is to really, say back what's more realistic. Like, yeah, I do struggle with this, but I'm really going to make a choice to be on my own side. And, this is why I struggle with it. But, here's how I'm going to move forward. And then it really has to do with making a plan of action and following through with that action, even though initially the negative thoughts are going to get louder. The image I like to give people sometimes is almost like a parent yelling at you to get you back into line. How dare you do that? You're just going to make a fool of yourself. You're going to exercise. You're going to look like such an idiot, and, it talks you out of doing the things that are on your own side. And if you can just stick with it and keep doing the behavior, eventually these negative thoughts will fade into the background, almost like a parent that gets tired of nagging, if you will. And so you really want to go through that. And I think in our society, we think of anxiety as a negative thing, like, if it makes you feel anxious, don't do it, or take a pill, let's get rid of it. But I think that when we're going to have positive behavioral change, it's going to make us anxious. So it's taking a step outside of what this negative thought process is directing us to do, and really sticking with that behavior, even if it makes us anxious.
So accepting that maybe you have a point of view, your inner critical voice has a point of view, and maybe even some validity. There's some truth to this. On the other hand, the positive focus, the positive intention will get you a lot more of what you really want than that whole negative inner critic that is really hurting you.
Right, and I think a lot of people think of it as like this inner critic is what keeps them in line. Like, if I don't beat myself up about not exercising, I'll never exercise. Well, no, because this critical inner voice is not like a conscience. It plays both sides of the coin. It's also the part that's seducing you to stay on the couch by saying things like, you really don't need to get up and exercise. You're really tired. You worked so hard today. Don't worry about it, So it first takes that point of view, sort of instructing you not to take the action. And then, at the end of the evening when you've not gotten up the couch and you've watched your, 15th TV show, it's like, you're so lazy. You never do anything. You said you were going to exercise tonight. You didn't even get up off the couch. So it plays both sides of the coin to realize that it's never your friend. And it's never, again, appropriate to beat yourself up, because beating ourselves up for bad behavior or for something we don't like or we want to change doesn't lead to change. It just makes us feel a lot more psychological pain and distress, and makes us want to self-soothe. So then we want to eat, the cake while we're sitting on the couch so that we can feel better. So it just feeds the whole cycle. It doesn't ever lead to positive behavioral change. While having a curious, open, accepting, and loving attitude towards yourself, where you're basically compassionate towards yourself, even about something you don't like, and deciding to change it, and then just making a systematic plan for changing it. And if you fall off that plan, instead of beating yourself up for falling off the plan, just thinking, okay, how did I get into trouble? What am I going to do differently next time? What got me off course? So it's a friendly attitude toward yourself at all times that'll move you forward. And like you said, having that positive intent of here's my plan, even though I might not do it perfectly and I might not do it, right every time. This is my plan. I'm going to keep that intention and I'm going to keep moving forward with it.
I love the way you pointed out that it's like playing both sides against each other. And often as I'm working with clients and we're talking about their subconscious, they go, well, how do I get my subconscious to be on my side? It seems like it's going one direction or it's going another direction, and isn't it supposed to be working for me?
Yeah, it's supposed to be, but it isn't, because we're all basically divided. There's part of us that's goal-directed, that's life-affirming. That's our real self. But we also, in the process of growing up, incorporate what we would call an anti-self, or a part of us that's actually turned against us, that is looking to sabotage us. And it's a form of self-parenting where we're both soothing ourselves and punishing ourselves, much as we are treated early in our life. And unfortunately, that part exists within us. What we got to do is recognize it, understand where it came from, not to establish blame, because, I'm a parent and I'm not trying to blame parents, but, parents are real people. And they have mixed feelings about themselves, and they have both positive feelings about themselves, which we naturally assimilate into our personality, but they also have critical feelings toward themselves, which we take on in the form of this critical inner voice. So often our core critical inner voices are the very same as our parents. And the take-home message to parents is you got to feel good about yourself, because your child will pick up how you don't feel good about yourself too. But, we do have this part of us that's turned against us that isn't working for us. And it's important to recognize it and to be aware of it and to realize that we are divided in this way and, recognize when we're more than 51% on our own side and when we're more than 51% turned against ourselves as well.
Yes, what we're constantly reassuring people of in emotional wisdom training is to move into that position of acceptance. Right? Accept the conflict, accept the inner critical voice, accept the past, the stories, and then move into awareness. And from that awareness, then you can awaken to all of the different possibilities and choices that you can make. So you're talking about doing some journaling, you're talking about creating some positive action plans.
Absolutely. And you can do this in all different areas of your life. Because the critical inner voice affects us in our relationships, it affects us in how we treat our children, it affects us in how we do in our work or school endeavors. So in all these different areas, and in our book, Conquer Critical Inner Voice, we go into all these different areas and ways you can identify this. The critical inner voice plays a huge role in any addictive behavior we engage in, again, by playing both sides of the coin, first seducing us into the behavior, then punishing ourselves afterwards, which makes us, again, feel more distressed, so then we self-soothe again. So it's really recognizing this process so we can be empowered and we can have some perspective, like you're saying, where we can be able to observe and where we can really, take our own side when moving out into the world and, again, have our actions be in line with our real goals, desires, the things that matter to us, the things that light us up, that give meaning to our life.
I love the way you say that. Take our own side.
Yeah.
Be for us, working with us, moving forward.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the other subjects that you talk about a lot and that I've noticed is the suicide prevention that you're involved with. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we got very interested in suicide because these critical inner voices really do drive suicidal behavior. If you think about it, there's a whole continuum of self-destructive thoughts that we have about ourselves. Everything from just mild self-critical thoughts that we all have at one time or another to extreme self-hatred, all the way up to suicidal thinking. And then there's also a corresponding continuum of self-destructive behaviors that people engage in, everything from just limiting our lives, kind of putting ourselves in a box, thinking we can't do very much, to engaging in behaviors like substance abuse or that are not immediately life-threatening but can truncate or shorten our life, and all the way up to suicidal behaviors. And what we started to realize is there's a real relationship between these two continuums, that how a person's thinking about themselves has a whole lot to do with how they're likely to behave. So if we can get a hold of these thoughts or these critical inner voices, what we're telling ourselves, we can do a lot to understand how at risk somebody might be of suicide. We can do a lot to work with those critical inner voices to help somebody really combat them so that they will no longer feel suicidal. And then we can look at whether we've been successful at that by looking at whether we've really changed the way they're thinking toward themselves. But in terms of suicide prevention, we got very interested in, first of all, how could we assess risk, and also how could we intervene in a way that can really help somebody who is really in the grips of what some people call the suicidal mode, the suicidal trance, where these thoughts take more and more control over their behavior. And, you know, the first step of really helping somebody is reaching out to them and making contact and really being willing to hear what's going on in their minds and see the world through the filter they're seeing the world. Because suicide is not done in a rational state where you're really weighing choices. It's done under the influence of this critical inner voice where, you know, your whole life is looking very dark and helpless and hopeless to you, and, you know, where a person's really desperate to make a change.
A person is really desperate to make a change. Now, that's an actual positive way of seeing this. Right? And
yeah,
they're really desperate to make a change. They'll do anything.
They'll do anything to change their state. Unfortunately, what they do is, you know, what some people call a very permanent solution to a temporary problem, because these voices will wax and wane. And when you're, you know, the next morning your glass might look a whole lot more half full, you know. So the real issue is to get in there and really deal with these critical inner voices so that you can help the person really start to see their life in a different way. And, you know, one way people have talked about suicide is that, you know, it's being an unbearable psychological pain. And, you know, what our job is in reaching out to a person who's suicidal is making it just bearable. You know, suicidal people often have complex problems that these critical inner voices are driving. They're seeing their whole life through this filter, and if we can help them make it just bearable, then we can start to really shift. And if we can teach them skills for staying alive when they're, you know, in the grips of these negative thoughts, then we can do a lot to save lives.
So what are some of the skills you train people to use when they're in the grips?
Well, the first are really ways of sort of both tolerating the strong negative emotions that they're having. You know, some people can sit with feeling miserable for a long time, but other people, when they start to feel miserable, they feel like they're desperate to do something about it, to, you know, again, to change that feeling, even at the cost of it losing their own lives. So, you know, it's helping people develop distress tolerance and also learn healthy coping strategies for regulating their emotions, because often self-harm are strategies for trying to regulate emotions that the person's having difficulty dealing with. And if you can teach people healthy coping strategies for dealing with those emotions, they can do a lot better. So it's recognizing these critical inner voices and the negative feelings that they're feeding, and really working on not feeding those feelings and actually having strategies for calming yourself down. If you think about it from perspective of interpersonal neurobiology, suicide happens in what Dan Siegel would call flip-lid state, where our middle prefrontal cortex is basically shut down and our emotions are firing out of control. And what we want to help people do is get their lid back on, to get their higher functions of their brain back online, so they can have a wider range of options in terms of how they're going to behave, and they can see things from a more rational perspective and not just be in the grips or at the mercy of these negative thoughts.
Yeah, what we do with emotional wisdom training and core alignment coaching is have people stop, stand, breathe, begin to do a reality check, which is just look around and really begin to just see what's there. Anything to move them out of that feeling cycle.
Right. That's getting them back into the present moment instead of lost in the thoughts. And the breathing is really important because that helps you get your lid back on. And then, like you said, just looking around and altering, this kind of, as this thought process takes over in suicide, or what some people call, again, the suicidal trance, the person's not looking around. They're not being able to see options. They're not in touch with their body. So just standing. So first of all, so you feel yourself standing on the ground, taking those breaths, getting centered, and looking around and looking where you really are in the world. I think, what you're saying is really helpful, especially at those moments where we're in the most distress.
Right, because when we talk about suicide or the suicidal patterns those are the extremes. On the other hand, there's all these levels that lead us up to that. And basically these coping mechanisms will work with anyone and any, I call them spin cycles, the spin cycles of everyday living.
Right.
And sometimes those spin cycles pick us up or take us out like a tornado.
Right, and we're caught up in that whirl of negative thoughts, which is feeding the negative feelings. And as the negative feelings are feeling worse, that's playing back on the thoughts and saying, "See, you really feel that terrible, so it must be a disaster." And like you said, it's that spin cycle where the thoughts and feelings are just whirling and feeding each other. And it's anything to do to break that pattern. I mean, like you said, it's not just when we're in a suicidal state, but when we are triggered by anything that's going on in our life. An interaction with somebody, a feeling that we were rejected or criticized or, misperceived or whatever has got us spinning. And like you said, getting centered and back in touch with what's really going on and being able to sort of take a step back is really important at those moments.
So some of the other books that you have written have to do with psychotherapy. What is psychotherapy?
What is psychotherapy? Psychotherapy is a process of being helpful to another person who's trying to work on their emotional state or whatever the problems are that are going on in their life. So, obviously we have the book Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice, but our most recent book is called Self Under Siege, and it really focuses on a process we call differentiation, or starting to really uncover your real self. And the first step in that process is really separating from these critical inner voices. But the second step is really looking at, are there any traits or behaviors that you've picked up that were the worst behaviors of your parent that you're now living out in your life? Are there ways that you behave in your life today that you don't like? So maybe you get very harsh or critical with your partner or with friends, and that's a trait that your parent had. And it's really looking at those traits and starting to separate from negative traits of our parents that we took into ourselves, where we identified with them. The third step in differentiation is also looking at ways we adapted to our early social environment that were the best possible adaptation we could have made at the time to our family, but they are not working for us in our adult life. So let's say it was very adaptive in your family to get quiet and just sort of not say anything about what you thought or felt, because then, everything sort of stayed kind of smooth and even. Well, when you get into relationships with people, not saying what you think or what you feel is probably not going to lead to a very good course for your relationship. So maybe that's an adaptive pattern that was, again, very helpful to you as a child, but that's no longer working for you as an adult, and breaking with those patterns. And then lastly, the fourth step in differentiation is just really looking at what are your real goals, the things that really matter to you in life, that really light you up, that really give your life meaning. And what is your core value system, what you really believe, and really living your life and charting your course with going with the things that really matter to you, that really light you up, that give your life meaning, and living by your core values that are your own personal set of moral compass, if you will. So I think that that's a really important book, too, and sort of looking even just beyond breaking with the critical inner thoughts, but really moving to being your full, real adult self.
So can you say the name of that book again?
Sure, it's called The Self Under Siege, a new look at differentiation.
Self Under Siege?
Uh-huh. And it looks at how we're under siege from all these, in all these ways from our early influences that aren't really letting us live in our adult self and really go for the things we want and to give our life meaning.
So it's kind of what we were talking about earlier with the subconscious playing both sides. That's the self under siege, because there's the self that wants to move and get going, and then there's the siege that's like, oh, that's not going to get you where you want to go.
Right. Exactly. And we wrote a book called Sex and Love and Intimate Relationships, which really looks at how this plays out in your romantic life, because that's another place that this critical inner voice plays a role, both keeping us out of relationships altogether, feeling like, you're better off on your own, and also really wreaking havoc with the relationships we do have if we get into a good relationship, the ways we may sabotage it, actually. Or the way our subconscious may be looking for partners who fit more with people from our past than who we say we want to look for. So it really looks at all those aspects that interfere with good relationships and how to have better, healthier, more satisfying, fulfilling love and sex relationships.
Basically, how to emotionally respond so that you're getting more of what you want instead of reacting emotionally based on past programming. Stories, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, the way your parents raised you. I call them the PATS, the persistent attitude training.
Right. And it's persistent in attitude training at a time when we're incredibly vulnerable. We're born just soaking up our social environment because, in order to survive from this moment we're born, we need other people to take care of us. And so we get very attuned into their emotional states and what's going on for them and, how they're responding to us and all of that. And so, it's training at a very vulnerable time in life, and we need to start to recognize how it may be affecting us still as adults and how we can get more, in touch with our adult selves and who we really are and develop into the unique person that we would be.
Because we don't know anything when we're little. We just gather in the information. And we're gathering information based on our experiences. And so it really might work really well for you when you're 4 to not talk back, to not express yourself.
That might have been really a survival strategy with a parent that couldn't, allow you to have much of a voice.
Right. And then here you are now as an adult, and it's time to express yourself.
Right. And you're trying to express yourself, but there's a part of you that's saying it's not safe to express yourself. So then, if you take a little venture out and if you get any negative feedback at all, you go back to that defense, and it seems like a very safe place to be, but it's not really working for getting you where you want to go in your adult life.
So The Self Under Siege is the latest book that you've written?
Yes.
So
yeah.
It's an expansion on the inner critical voice?
Right, because it looks at both the critical inner voices that we get early in our life. It looks at differentiation in those different ways that I mentioned. So again, separating from negative traits of our parents that we've incorporated, separating from adaptations we made as a child that are no longer working, and really identifying what gives our life meaning and going for it. So it's taken another step, and also looks at how we also incorporate critical inner voices from our subsequent relationships. So, if we had a relationship, for instance, a romantic relationship where we got really close to somebody and we're vulnerable and it didn't go well, we may have new voices we've incorporated from those situations as well that have expanded on and added on to whatever negative thoughts we got about ourselves early in our life. And so it's really identifying all those different points of view and really coming back and, again, getting centered in ourselves and answering from our own perspective and really getting aware of what our real point of view is and what really matters to us.
Yes, I say we have events, incidents, and accidents that occur, and when those happen, we have feelings, thoughts, and we either attach it to an old belief or we create a new belief. And that's basically what you're saying here. All those relationships that we have with someone, and we're all positive about it, and then it goes negative, and then we go, oh, it's always going to go negative. Well, it was going positive before it started to go negative.
Right. And unfortunately, we have a stronger memory trace for negative events than positive ones. And that's because they, especially things that seem life-threatening, and a lot of things when we're very little seem life-threatening that might not from an adult perspective. And when they look that way, we try to remember everything about them because we don't want to be in that situation again. It's a survival mechanism. So, unfortunately, sometimes those old beliefs are quite negative because we take them in at times of stress, you know. It's not our parents on the average that are what we incorporate necessarily in terms of this anti-self. It's the worst times. It's those particular times of stress, the parent at their absolute worst. And so a lot of those old messages are negative.
Well, and another thing that happens is it'll be around an event, and so our heart will be wide open because we're excited or we're ready to experience. And it's like when you're going on a vacation or you're going to grandma's and grandpa's house, you're all excited about, and your parents get in a huge fight.
Right.
You're already open. Your heart is vulnerable, as you were sharing before, and then this gets written on top of that.
Right. And it gets written on top of, right. It gets written on top of that, you know, and warns us that getting excited is going to lead to bad things if we're not careful. You know, so yeah, it does get written on top of that. It gets associated with that.
So what would we do if we were meeting somebody or we were exposed to somebody and we could hear their inner critical voice? Not our own, but someone else's.
Right. If we could hear theirs, we'd probably hear all the ways that we'd hear all their doubts about meeting us. And, you know, so their hesitance, instead of us reading that as coldness or aloofness, we might understand that it's really based on them being critical of themselves. You know, sometimes people who are the most self-critical, you know, look down, they don't make eye contact, and we may think they're very superior, or they think, you know, we project onto them very freely because we're not aware. But if we tuned into their critical inner voices, we'd have a lot more compassion for them, and we'd also realize that a lot of what we may read as being them responding to us negatively is really based on their own critical inner voice criticizing them. You know, don't be too friendly, you know, that you'll just make a fool of yourself, you know, that kind of thing. You know, well, so it's important to recognize that, you know, we're in the same boat as all other human beings, and, you know, when people are acting badly, they're probably at the grips in these negative thoughts, and we can have much more compassion towards them, and also maybe be more successful at helping turn them around if we could pay attention to the fact that they may be criticizing themselves as well.
So what are some ways that we might be able to turn them around? Because we were talking about the suicide prevention as well. So
the first thing is just reaching out to
being
the person.
Compassionate, reaching out.
Accepting them, being compassionate, just smiling at people can save lives. There's people who, you know, I'm up here in San Francisco where we have the Golden Gate Bridge, which is, you know, the most popular place to die by suicide in the whole world. And, you know, a lot of people have left notes saying if one person smiled on me on the way to the bridge, I wouldn't have told them everything. I wouldn't have done it. You know, and so smiling at people, being willing to talk to people, reaching out to the person, just being willing to be with them. You know, we forget how valuable it is just to be another person reaching out and showing that we care. You know, it makes a huge difference. And being willing to listen to them non-judgmentally, just draw them out, what are they thinking and feeling, trying to understand how they're seeing the world. And again, trying to make it just bearable. And as a layperson, you know, a friend, a family member, it's just trying to help get that person to good health, you know. And one thing people can do is, if you're worried about a friend or you're concerned, you can call the National Suicide Lifeline 1-800-273-TALK number. And 24 hours a day, you can talk to somebody who'll help talk you through how to help a friend. You know, there's a lot of good resources online. You can also get online and chat with them now with our National Lifeline. And it can really make a huge difference. We have a lot of good resources on our website, Psych Alive, on how to talk to a friend who might be suffering from suicidal thoughts and feelings. We have helpful things that the person can do to help keep themselves alive. If you're worried about yourself, you know, how can you make a hope kit for yourself that's going to help you stay hopeful when you're feeling hopeless? How can you do some things that are going to make you safer? You know, how can you get good help? So we talk about how to talk to a friend, to a family member, whether that's a parent, a child, a sibling. And, you know, we've gotten good feedback from people that they've tried it and it's really worked. It's helped them reach out to a friend or, again, a sibling and save a life. So we have all that information on our website, Psych Alive. we also have a website we're doing up at Esalen called Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice, where it's a 3-day workshop, a Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, the weekend of January 24th through 26th. And, where people can learn about how to conquer their critical inner voice and really strengthen their real sense of self.
Yeah, I saw that. That looks wonderful. Great place to be, too.
Yeah, wonderful place to be. If you haven't been there, that will transport you as well, just being, in the combination of the beautiful mountains and the ocean right there. That natural beauty helps you get centered in yourself, too. And we incorporate some mindfulness practices into the workshop as well to help people get grounded and be able to see these critical inner voices as just thoughts going by and that they don't have to get caught up in them and, get out of that spiral that you were talking about. And we're also going to be doing on PsychoLive a online e-course about conquering your critical inner voice and one about relationships in the new year, so in 2014. So.
You have been in this field since before 1987. So with all that you've been experiencing, do you see there being a rise in suicide, or do you think that there's just publicity that's going in that direction?
Well, I think that there has been, in the United States, actually, our rate had been going down for years, just, slightly, but going down. And with the financial crisis, starting about in 2008, we start to see a little bit of a rise, actually, again. So there has been some increase, and that's true in all the European countries, too, where there's been financial crisis. And, the rise has been proportional to the amount of crisis and the lack of a safety net. The more there's a safety net or way for people to get help or resources, the better people do. And it's not people at the bottom, by the way. It's people who've lost wealth. It's one thing to be poor. You learn how to be poor. But it's transitions that people don't do so well with. So it's going from having more wealth to losing wealth. That can be hard, or it can be hard in the opposite direction, too, and particularly positive things happen to you, by the way. That can be challenging because, again, it can trigger these critical inner voices. We have seen a little bit of a shift. It's interesting that our military, which has been seeing quite a significant rise over the course of the wars that we've been in for the last while, actually this year is seeing a decline for the first time. And it's interesting that our military is spending millions of dollars right now to research what works and what doesn't in suicide prevention. And they're doing everything from early identification to good interventions. And they're funding this research is just going to let us all know a whole lot more about what works in terms of suicide prevention. And we're starting to reap the benefits of it looks like. And we're starting to see a sea change for the first time in our military suicide rates this year. And we're starting to identify some treatments that really work that, and they are really targeted. They specifically address suicide. And basically they teach the person the skills of how to stay alive when they're in the grips of these negative thoughts. And, that's very important because whatever other problems the person has with depression or post-traumatic stress or whatever else it might be that they're suffering from, substance abuse, that play a role in suicide, if we can help make them not suicidal and learn the skills to stay alive even when they're feeling bad, then we can address the other deeper psychological problems. But if we don't keep them alive, then we don't get to work on it at all, right? So we've got to knock out the suicidality first. And we can do that with some of these newer interventions that really seem to be working.
So out of all of the things that you have been involved with for years, what do you see is really happening in the public attention around psychotherapy? No.
Well, I think a couple of things. I think we're starting to move to where mental health is being less stigmatized. So if people are struggling with mental health issues, that they are more likely to get the help they need because it's not so stigmatized to get that help. So if you're really suffering with critical inner voices and you're doing all these things to help yourself, but they're not it's not being enough, that you really can go and get help. And it's interesting that we're finally getting mental health parity in terms of insurance companies covering treatment for mental health issues. And, you know, now we've really got to, you know, work on people not seeing it as a stigma so they will go and get that mental health. I think that's one thing that our military's done that's been more effective in terms of people getting help with these problems is they're starting to destigmatize mental health. It's not like, you know, if you're this big, strong, tough military person, you know, who's supposed to be able to just, you know, conquer anything. If you can't conquer it yourself, it's okay to get help. So I think that's a really important sea change, that mental health issues are getting more addressed. And I also think that there's a real shift in terms of mindfulness practices entering the mental health field. And the practice that you talked about, you know, taking a minute stand, taking a couple breaths, you know, looking around you and getting centered is a mindfulness practice. And, you know, I think psychotherapies across the board, whether they're cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic, or whatever, are really starting to incorporate more mindfulness. And I think as a culture, we're learning more wellness practices. It's interesting that, you know, I work for the Glendon Association and Psych Alive, but I also have a private practice and see patients. And what I'm seeing is that these practices really do help people. And so that's why we're trying to get them across both in Psych Alive and also with the people that I work with in my psychotherapy practice. And what I'd really like to work from having a psychotherapy practice where we teach mental health issues after the fact is a wellness center where we would help people develop the skills to stay well and to really live their lives fully with meaning, where they really can feel good about themselves and pursue the things they really want and need in life. And so that's where I'd like to see mental health go even a step further. I think we're going in that direction, but I don't think we're all the way there yet. But I think in terms of thinking about resilience or building hardiness, you know, two subjects that we've done webinars about, that, you know, I think we can start to get there of developing more health and focusing on that rather than focusing on unhealth.
Yes, emotional wisdom training.
Absolutely.
Where we are learning how to respond wisely to our emotions, support other people through their emotions, because emotions are part of who we are. The feelings, thoughts, and beliefs. The tough times, the hard times, they're going to happen. Those times when we get triggered.
Right, and if you think life's going to be easy, it actually sets you up for not doing well because then you're horrified when it's not. Instead of realizing it's going to be difficult at times, you're going to have painful thoughts or painful feelings. And, you know, feelings are like a roller coaster. They're going to go through us. We're going to feel different things. But, you know, how we behave is really more like driving a car, and we can make decisions about it. And if we're really, you know, a psychologically healthy person or a mentally healthy person or the ideal differentiated person, we're going to have access to our feelings, be able to feel them, but act rationally and really act in our own self-interest in our life.
So again, tell people how they can find you.
Sure.
Do you have a website?
I have a website that's Dr. Lisa Firestone, but our website for the general public that has great information and all of the webinars and things that I've been talking about today, and we'll have information about our e-courses or any workshops we're doing, is psychalive.org. And then we also have a website called glendon.org, or part of the Glendon Association, that has great materials and resources for professionals in the mental health field. So you can go to either of those websites and find out information. So either psychalive.org or glendon.org about what we're doing, any upcoming workshops we have in the community for mental health professionals, and then also, again, about these webinars that we do, the free ones for the public or the ones for CEs professionals, and then any workshops we're doing as well.
What about that book, Self Under Siege? Where would people find that book?
Well, that's available on any of the online bookstores. And
like Amazon.com or any of those books?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's available in all those locations, as is our book, Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice. So you can certainly get them through the Glendon website, but you can get them on any of the online bookstores as well.
Yeah, because I know the people that work with emotional wisdom training and core alignment coaching, those books would definitely be in alignment with the information that we support people in recognizing, those feelings, thoughts, and beliefs, the stories, the past, the childhood, the parent, child, adult voices, all that kind of stuff is really in alignment with our message. So thank you so much for taking your time out from the seminar to join us today.
Oh, you're welcome, and I'm glad to hear that. It sounds like our thinking is very much in line, and and again, the Conquer book just gives you lots of good exercises to help to become more aware of those stories, so that you can then take, really take actions that are based on new possibilities and new ideas.
So have a wonderful time in San Francisco at your seminar. And
thank you.
I would love to have you come back and join us again for more information. What I want the audience to take with them right now is, what will you take with you from this conversation that will support you for the rest of your life?
When everything just falls in line, we live and learn from our mistakes. The deepest cuts are healed by faith. Now I believe there comes a time when everything just falls in line. We live and learn from our mistakes. The deepest cuts are healed by faith. Now I believe there comes a time when everything just falls